Hi, it's Matt Giggs here, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome to an interview with us on the Side Hustle, Mr. John Ayling, OBE. And John, I'm going to ask you if it's okay to do as a very, very brief introduction, because there's so much to introduce you on. I think it would be fair for you to summarize it in brief, just to give us a highlight as to what your career path's been since you left school, if you don't mind.
Okay, do you want me to talk about school?
Yes, we're going to come on to school, but if you don't mind, since school up until now, you've had an amazing career, an amazing impact. So yeah,
I'm going to be a lot older than some of the guys you've interviewed. So I left school in the 1962, the year before Kennedy was assassinated.
Yes.
And I was an average pupil, I suppose, at a grammar school. So grammar school background, and I got okay A levels, not great. And at the last minute of the summer after the A levels, I scraped into Exeter University. Now, I didn't realize I was going to be lucky to go to such a good university in such a great place. But I did go to university to study geography, which was always my top subject. And that allowed me to probably have a career path in my head that was very different to where I was going when I thought, I don't really know what to do with the rest of my life. I certainly don't want to be a teacher. And my careers master at the grammar school had said, go into the civil service, young man. So
right. Okay.
I got away with that and went to Exeter University, studied geography, and got a 2-2. In fact, I subsequently married my wife, who went to Leicester University and studied geography.
Oh, wow.
And our daughter went to Bristol and studied geography. So I've actually got the worst degree in my family because they all got 2-1s. So I came out with a 2-2, not having a clue what to do.
Yeah.
And one of my oldest mates, who was a year older than me, had gone to Bangor University and studied physics or something. And he said, I didn't know what to do. And I think you might find what I'm doing quite interesting, because I'm working in the media side of advertising. And two reasons why I quite like that. I was always, the one advantage I always had, I was exceptionally numerous. Wasn't particularly good at maths, but I was very good at mental arithmetic.
Wow.
And I also liked communicating with people more and more as I got older. Wasn't quite shy in my teens, that came out of that. So I started going for interviews at the big agencies in 1965. And some of them offered me jobs. In fact, JWT offered me a job, told me where I was going to sit and who I was going to work with. And I never heard from them again. So all these years on, I've never, ever been into JWT other than in disgust at the way they behaved towards me.
Wow.
So I ended up going to what was then the best marketing-led, media-led agency at the time, called Macias Wynne Williams. Had all the big packaged goods clients. And I went into the media department as a young graduate trainee. And one of the first graduates in the mid-60s actually went into media, because at that time, a lot of the guys on the media side were buyers, salesmen, entrepreneurs, but not necessarily educated as well as I was. So I went into Macias. And the interesting thing out of that was I then changed jobs every 18 months. So I went from Macias to an agency called S.H. Benson, which was very, very posh. I went from S.H. Benson to Garland Compton, which was very heavy, Procter & Gamble, led by some great business people. And then I went to a creative agency called the Kirkwood Company, which was run by a guy called Ronnie Kirkwood. So in 6 years, I went from nowhere, not knowing much media, to being a director of a creative agency that was one of the star agencies of the 70s. The interesting thing about that was that all of those changes in my career were actually manipulated by a man who I still see today, who's now in his late 80s, who was the sales director at that time of the Daily Mirror and subsequently IPC magazines. And I was his protege, and he would come and see me about 18 months and say, I think it's time you moved on again.
So he kind of took you under his wing as a mentor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a mentor. I had lots of mentors by the fourth one, but to start with, I really wasn't a mentor. And when in my first job at Macy's Wynne Williams, I went to see my boss, who was the media director, but also the chairman of the agency, and said, I've just been offered a job at SH Benson. And he said, well, you won't like them, they're dead posh. And I said, well, they've offered me a lot of money. He said, well, we can match that. I said, what do you think I'm earning now? Because he didn't know what my salary was.
Brilliant.
So that set me up, because he offered me what effectively was less than that. And he didn't know what I was getting. So, and he and I became great mates after that. He said, you should go to Benson's. I went to Benson's, and I was then quite senior, only 18 months in the business. But they said, we want you to work on Unilever business, because the guy who's you're replacing for 3 months is our gold medalist hope in the Tokyo Olympics in rowing, a guy called Bill Barry. So right. Bill gave me about, probably realistically, 2 days, and he buggered off to Tokyo and got a silver medal at the Olympics while I was handling all his accounts for him.
Wow.
Then went to Garland Compton, where they headhunted me again through my mentor, and worked on some serious business. I became media manager there at the age of 27, I think it was. And I was with some very, very sharp media buyers who I really learned a lot from. And I learned a lot from, my biggest account then was Fine Fair Supermarkets. And I was working direct with a guy called Jimmy Gulliver, who became quite well known in the business world. And Jimmy Gulliver would only talk to me. And I was 27 and he was a multi-millionaire. So
wow.
The last thing that happened was the mentor said, you need to get into the creative world. There's this new agency starting that's been going pretty well, but they've missed out on media. Ronnie Kirkwood is a legend, she was. Yeah, and he was working with an ex-Heinz marketing director, Tom O'Leary, again was legendary, and a marketing director from Y&R called Gordon Metcalf. So I joined them then in 1971, aged 27, and they put me on the board a year later. So I learned a lot from a fantastic cross-section of agencies. They were all top 10, top 15 agencies, but so different. I had a career that allowed me to learn from them. They then sold out to Lopex, and it all went pear-shaped. And so at that time, the media and creative world was splitting up. So I was still single at that time. So I didn't even have a mortgage. So I was single, no mortgage, and decided to set up John Ayling and Associates in 1978, purely because I could.
Yeah.
There were about 4 of us at that time starting media agencies who all in the end did very well, and they're all still mates of mine today.
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, so 1978, I mean, business, running a business, starting a business is a huge challenge for a lot of people, and many businesses fail in the first couple of years, as you know. What was
I was very I say lucky. I wasn't lucky. I learned a lot in the preceding 10 years. And
yeah, with those different mentors.
I had 27,000 in the bank. So Kirkwood's have made some money, and 27,000 in those days was quite a lot of money. So I set up John Ayling Associates with my first 25,000, and it had to go well because I only had £2,000 left. And the interesting thing with that was that I had a client who said to me at Kirkwood's, if you ever decide to go on your own, I'll follow you wherever you go.
Wow.
It was a very big spending client called Marshall Cavendish, who were in the parts work publishing business, selling encyclopedias in weekly parts. And you collected 96 issues and it became an encyclopedia. And the reality of that was it was massively entrepreneurial, it was massively formulaic, but it had 1 minute we were launching a part work on cookery with Robert Carrier called Carrier's Kitchen. Okay. And the next one we were launching a part work on football called Book of Football with Trevor Francis. And Trevor Francis appeared in the first commercial for Book of Football when he was 7 years old. And he
was the first £1 million footballer, wasn't he, Trevor Francis?
He was. And he was a very charming young boy, you know.
Yeah.
I was lucky that I had a client who absolutely believed in me. He said, I'm not going to stay with Kirkwood's. If you leave them, I will give you the business, which he did. Kirk was not too pleased, but that was it. By then, I'd got disillusioned with the way they were going. They'd made some money and had walked away from the centre. And in 3 months of working with my own company and taking some people with me, some who I'd known in the previous regime, some in previous. So I had a network. I started with 8 people, so we had quite a lot of overhead in week one.
Year one, yeah.
In fact, our first ever client was Marshall Cavendish, and in the first month, in 1978, they spent £1 million on our first launch. And £1 million in 1978 was enough to get them up and off the ground. So that was quite important. I then met Bill at Christmas, and we had a beer for Christmas. And he said, now you've got this company established and your team are working so well, I'd like you to take on all my business globally.
Wow.
I said, that's really interesting. Where and when would you like me to start? He said, I'd like you to start next week in Australia. And I'd never been to Australia in my life. And that started a career in global media that took in half the world.
Because how many people are in the business now today?
How many in my business now? The 4 partners I set up with, they left about 10 years ago. They made their money. I had a significant shareholding. They had 15% between them. And they'd got to the stage when they weren't as hungry as I was. So I was working 24 hours a day around the world. And they were running the business very effectively. And they made significant funds for their own benefits, but they didn't really want to take on the responsibilities beyond that.
Because you built, like I said, it's a huge business over a short period of time, by the sounds of it.
Yes, it was. And in fact, we were very lucky because after our first year, ITV went on strike. There was a strike started in 1979 when we'd been going for a year, and from August to December, there was no television.
Wow. So media just went...
We were stuffed because television was the be-all and end-all of our business in the UK. And so we obviously experimented with every other medium. And we found, surprise, surprise, that other media worked. So, and at that time, we had a vastly growing radio industry that had only been going for 4 or 5 years post Capital and LBC. So radio worked, we found it worked, press worked, and we gradually and managed to get our way through what was a terribly difficult period. In fact, the interesting thing was that that the union that took us on was called SOGAT, and they took on the advertising industry, and it was run by a guy called Alan Sapper, and he and I stood on platforms at industry conferences in Monte Carlo in that period, me fighting the corner on behalf of the advertising business and him fighting the corner on behalf of the unions.
Wow.
And 4 years later, I moved to Chiswick Square, where I now still live, with my by then wife, and suddenly realised that this Mr. Sapper actually lived opposite me, 30 yards from my front door.
So you're literally 30 yards away on the conference podium as such, and then you're literally 30 yards away in real life every day. What strikes me when I read your website and I look through your backstory is you're very sporty, obviously.
Very important to me, yes.
Yes, I can see how important sport's been to you, and just following sport, being involved in sport. You've run the London Marathon on 4 occasions.
4 times, yes.
I mean, I've only done it once, and that was
my last one was when I was 70. So
congratulations! That's amazing.
In fact, I ran it with my daughter, and she and I have done it twice together. She's an interesting story in her own right, because she's very involved in sport. And on the last one, she said, "Daddy, I can't run this slowly." So she got Cutty Sark, she left me behind. Lovely story about that was that as I ran down the Mall, I got a standing ovation from thousands of people in the Mall outside Buckingham Palace. And I said, "Caroline's brilliant. She's gone on ahead and organised a standing ovation." And I looked round, and guess who was running past from the left-hand side? Running past me was Steve Redgrave, carrying a bucket of bricks or something, because he decided to run the marathon carrying heavy weights. On the right-hand side, there were 2 blokes dressed as a rhinoceros. So I was overtaken by Steve Redgrave and a rhinoceros in my last 100 yards of the marathon.
What an amazing feat, though, 4 London marathons. And I can see you.
The other thing I did, which was really interesting, if I'm boring you.
No, go for it. I'm really interested. This is the whole point. Yeah.
My charity over the years has always been the Lord's Taverners.
Yes.
And when the Channel Tunnel opened, the Daily Mail decided to open the Channel Tunnel by inviting 100 charities to walk through the tunnel from France to England. And so the Taverners said, "Sorted, Ian Botham." And Boss said, "I get claustrophobia. I couldn't walk through a tunnel for 32 miles in a tunnel under the sea." So I said, "I'll tell you what, I think I'll raise more money than you anyway, so I'll do it."
Oh.
So I was one of the charities. I got the Lord's Taverners, therefore, to be one of the 100 charities, thanks to the Daily Mail. And walked through the tunnel with the grace and the good. And the great story with that is I got a cricket bat signed by all our past presidents that were still alive then. So some who've sadly passed on, Terry Wogan, Ronnie Corbett, etc. And I got it signed and carried it through the tunnel. And about 6 miles out from Calais, the vicar of Bognor came up to me and said, I'm walking through the channel for Christian Aid." He said, "I've read a lot about you in the Daily Mail." He said, "My parishioners have agreed that if I can bowl with this cricket ball," he said, showing it to me, "if I can bowl to Graham Gooch, who was running for another charity,
right,
they'll give me loads of money for Christian Aid." I said, "I don't think that's a problem." We were live on BBC. So I talked to the girls who were channeling up and down the Channel Tunnel for the BBC and said, "What do you think?" They said, "That's brilliant." So we, 12 o'clock, halfway across the Channel Tunnel, Des Lynam cued us in from the BBC in London and said, "We're now going to the first ever cricket match ever played under the Channel. And the vicar of Bognor is bowling to Graham Gooch."
That's brilliant.
John Ayling's keeping wicket. Anyway, the guy didn't bowl a very good ball, pitched it a bit short. And Gucci hit it, we reckon, downhill straight, because the Channel Tunnel at that stage is straight. He hit it for 13 miles and we never found the ball. which is
I
like,
bet he enjoyed that. I bet Gucci enjoyed that. I mean, what a player he was as well. Just to add, but
so that's a bit of history for you.
yeah. Well, look, your career is absolutely, like I said, you've got lots to talk about and lots to be proud of. I mean, going back to school, John, was it Surrey you grew up in? Surrey?
I grew up, no, well, after the war. I was just born at the end of the war in Richmond, which is strange now because I'm now living in Chiswick, about 3 miles from where I started. And so I went to school in Richmond. We left in 1953, just before the coronation, and went down to live in Sussex. So I lived for my early life at primary school in Richmond, second part of primary education at a primary school in East Grinstead. And then in those days, if you were still a chance of getting into a grammar school, that was the education to go for. So I was lucky enough to pass my 11 plus and went to East Grinstead Grammar School.
You mentioned at the start of this that you didn't really know what you wanted to do or who you wanted to become as such when you left school. Did you get early indications of what you really treasured? And I know one of the things that stood out for me, if you don't mind me saying, is your core values in your business. And you've got some very clear principles that you work to there.
Yeah.
Did you tap into those in your early years and realize that they're the things that you're going to, I'm not trying to lead you here, but generally speaking, those core values seem to have followed you throughout your career?
I think so. Part of it was having parents who had core values. In that era, they did. And my father had been in the RAF, and he was a salesman. He was on the road, commercial travellers, they used to be called in those days. And my mother was a very high-powered secretary, and in East Grinstead was quite famous because it was where the plastic surgeons worked at the East Grinstead Queen Victoria Hospital. And my mother was secretary to the mates from there for 10 or 15 years and maybe longer. And so she had some core values. And, there were still then people who'd been caught in some horrific RAF accidents during the war, and she was still working with them 10 years later. So that was probably quite important. I think your values come from moving on. I was quite shy in my puberty years. I think 13, 14, it was a mixed grammar school, so that was good for me because boys and girls were just not an issue then. So that it wasn't one sex. And I think the thing that mattered to me was more about sport and people and networking, and I didn't realize then how important all of that was going to be in a career.
I mean, that seems to have been the thing that, I mean, you talked about going with different, you've certainly connected with some great leaders by the sounds of it in your business journey, your early years as a, in media, if you like, and certainly those first 10 years. Do you find
yes, I think I was lucky enough to have the confidence. I think Macius gave me incredible confidence. So going from being quite a relatively shy undergraduate, I was surrounded by people who were quite good business people, quite good media buyers, but didn't have, if you like, the tactical, strategic thinking that you need, which I'd got from uni. So I think over the years, I was lucky enough to meet a lot of people because I really cared about networking. So apart from the clients I've talked about, the Lord's Taverners was an issue. So I spent a lot of time at Buckingham Palace with Prince Charles, the Duke of Edinburgh, who's still our patron today, 70 years on.
Wow.
Prince Edward came when I walked through the Channel Tunnel. I presented a minibus at the Hilton Hotel in Park Lane, and Prince Edward was then our president, so he came along and presented a minibus to a school with me for what I'd raised going through the tunnel. I set up a polo tournament to raise money at Windsor, and Prince Charles, surprise, surprise, his team won. And I've still got in my downstairs loo a picture of me presenting the trophy to Prince Charles. So I've had some great relationships across the media. I was lucky enough to, in the various places I went to working with Marshall Cavendish around the world, I met some quite astonishing people. Spent an hour with Silvio Berlusconi in Italy,
Wow.
trying to persuade him that he ought to change his sales policy to give us more airtime. And he was the only one who ever said.
Did you? So, I mean, obviously, going back to school, you wouldn't have probably quite imagined the life that you were just about to go and lead as such, or did you realise that you had some real talent around just being around people? The people skills that you've got are clearly one of your pillars of your strengths, just throughout your business and your career. Is that something you were aware of at school?
No, I was aware. I loved sport. And sport does encourage you to be lead. I mean, I played cricket, village cricket in Sussex for 20 years, took 1,000 wickets in village cricket, and ended up inevitably being secretary of the club. And that was interesting because I was a bowler who couldn't bat very well. And we built a village club that actually ended up playing in major finals on the county ground at Hove. But my big sport at that time was hockey, and I got into the first team at Exeter, which is quite a good sports university. And I spent my life playing hockey for Oxted after university. And I think the important thing in that to me was that I just encouraged a lot of people to come and join our club. I spent a lot of time as first 11 captain in my younger days. Then when I got axed and put in the second and third 11, I decided the best thing to do was start a vintage team so we could all still play with the same guys we'd grown up playing with.
Nice.
Even today, aged 105, I'm still the president of the hockey club with a bunch of guys whose parents used to play with me. So,
that's amazing. That's amazing. Do you feel the kind of the sporting mentality has helped you a lot in business?
I think so. I'm a team player, and I think the company has always been a team effort.
Tell me about that, John. Do you mind? Because actually, that's a big thing. Because there's a lot of egos in media or in any big business, and building teams around very strong personalities. How have you found? What's been your strategy around that?
I think strategy is the right word. You have to have a strategy. It's very different today. My role is very different, and you have to encourage young people to come through.
Yeah.
And you have to have fun together. So even when we were making money, we spent it. My 60th birthday, we had 180 people in the long room at Lord's, all of whom had been friends and competitors and mates of mine, and that was quite important to me. It was actually money well spent, because actually you don't take it with you, and some days like that are days to remember. And
experiences.
Always, I mean, interestingly enough, I had a big party at Chelsea Football Club for a particular anniversary, and Abramovich turned up with 8 bodyguards because I got Dire Straits to come and play, and he loved Dire Straits, so, but he never spoke to me.
Oh wow! Wow, that's a great story. First of all, Dire Straits
stood with his 6 bodyguards.
I mean, what a coup to get Dire Straits to come and play at an anniversary, right?
Well, yeah, the lead singer had left by then. The rest of the band were together. So.
Yeah. Hey, that's all right. But I think
networking was always important. Teams are important.
Do you think networking's kind of not fallen down? Do you think there's less emphasis on networking today in business?
It's very different. Yes.
Because it's social networking, social media, but it's not the same.
In the last 2 years, networking has disappeared. I mean,
of course, yeah.
But actually, it has changed anyway, because I think I've had to work quite hard with some of our people to make them realise that actually clients are mates, and clients respect you and trust you, provided you work with them. And
well, that example you used in when you set your company up in 1978, when that client came with you, and that's trust, 100% trust.
Totally, absolutely.
I say to my staff, I mean, I'm very much, I've got 8 companies, but they're all under a group. And, you know, one of my sayings, we're in sales, is you can make a sale, you'll earn a commission, or you make a friend and you'll earn a fortune, you know. I'm a great believer in building relationships that are beyond the transaction. And networking is quite a big part of that for me.
Yes, when we were well into John Ayling Associates, I set up a separate company to compete against ourselves, called PhD, which is quite well known within the industry. And the interesting thing is that P&D had both worked for me for many years. So Patterson and Durden left us, went to WCRS, got fed up with it and said, we don't know what to do. And I said, why don't we start it again? And I'll take 25% of the company. But you need to have an outside devil's advocate networker alongside you. And that was the H in Nick Horsworth. And Nick Horsworth has always been one of my closest competitors and friends. So we set up PhD, and the rest is history. They broke even in month 1 and have become much richer than a lot of them ever expected to be.
So what I really enjoy listening to here is the confidence in you creating certain businesses or making decisions based on some certain fundamentals. Can you share?
It was easier back then, I have to say. It's not easy today. You know, you've got procurement people now. You've got people looking for a deal on agency commission, which is in many cases ridiculous. So we don't play in that game.
Yeah.
I think the world has changed a lot, and you have to be, if you like, slightly reflective on whether you want to work with certain people if they're only interested in getting a better bottom line for themselves rather than a better bottom line for actually generating incredible profits for their company.
Yeah, well, I certainly see that there's companies now that are really linking the values, obviously, that they share to not only recruit people within their business, but to actually work with clients that share or align with those values, which is a bit like the old way of networking. You know, you do business with people you trust, and it's very much the same principles. And
yes, I think the change that happened was when the media independents took the business away from creative agencies. And I was with Chris Ingram and David Reich and Alan Rich and Mike Yershin, and we all set up an association called the Association of Media Independents, the AMI, to compete against the IPA. And we were quicker on our feet, smarter, and we actually ended up helping to develop a generation of media people who didn't actually sit inside a creative agency as the J. Walter Thompsons and Saatchis would have done years ago. So that was quite important. And I think the creative agencies got a benefit out of that because they didn't have to get recognition. So we at one stage were working as media partners to Low Howard Spink, Bartle Bogle Hegarty, Ligas Delaney, White Collins, Rutherford Scott, Brignall, The Bar, Howell Henry, Caldecott Lewis. They're all major creative agencies, and they could set up with a £10, £100 company because we were taking all the risk with the media owners of recognition and, if you like, credibility in the business that they had in their own rights creatively, but not necessarily having to invest vast sums of money financially because we were able to help them do that.
Wow.
Change the industry, really.
Well, massively, yeah. I mean, it's had its challenges, like you said, with the ITV situation as well. Do you find when the big challenges arrive, a bit like COVID's been for a lot of people in the last, well, for a lot of industry in the last 12 months, you know, so I certainly came into March last year, a year ago, thinking, right, we could be writing off £1 million off our bottom line. And, you know, in the nicest possible way, that would hit us really hard as a small business. And, but then when you look at the opportunities and how you look at things, how important is the mindset of a leader of a business with regards to facing challenges?
I think luck comes into it.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time developing software systems and access to direct response on television for charities. And when the lockdown started, we had about 30 to 35 charity clients, all competing with each other, but all using DRTV, as we call it, in a way that generated a response. So during lockdown, our turnover was actually increased.
Right.
Now that is luck, because some of the big agencies who were heavily biased towards packaged goods, travel and holidays and motor cars have had significant losses in that period. And we've always been lucky, and we've also been quite astute in how we've kept assets in the company. So I don't think I'm a naturally entrepreneurial person in some ways, because we've always had money in the bank for the rainy day.
Okay, so okay, I understand. But do you think entrepreneurs are a special breed from your experience?
Yes, I do, but probably because I tend to mix with them. We are in the media industry is an entrepreneurial business, and
what makes
one of the things that I've always done, and it's happening at the moment, I've always run a cricket match between the media agencies and the salesmen from the media. So we're all fighting each other for business, but actually once a year we play cricket against each other. Yeah. It sounds pathetic, but we started it 38 years ago.
Didn't you get injured? Did you get injured in one of those matches? Did I read somewhere?
No, I got injured playing football against Saatchi and Saatchi.
Okay, that's all right. Not the cricket.
Yes,
I was wondering how injury at cricket, unless you get whacked.
No, I got very badly injured. I dislocated my kneecap.
That's it.
In the middle of Regent's Park. So that was the worst sporting injury I've ever had. No, that went away. No. So what we've actually got at the moment is a cricket fixture that's been going for 38 years and has raised about £3 million.
Wow.
And has put 120 minibuses for disadvantaged kids on the road, through people trying to knock each other's heads off on a cricket pitch and having a dinner afterwards to celebrate it.
You obviously got your OBE for your services to charity.
Services to sport, but
yeah,
it was for services to sport, including charity. So,
right.
Funnily enough, services support was quite important because I got involved. I've always been very interested in cricket, and I was lucky enough to work closely with Lord McLaurin, who asked three of us, Len Sanderson, the ad director of the Telegraph, John Bartle of Bartle Bagleheath, and myself, to sit as non-execs on the marketing committee of the England and Wales Cricket Board. So the three of us were right at the centre of the research that led to the invention of 2020 cricket. So actually, apart from raising money, we actually did some quite extraordinary things, and we're lucky enough to be right in the middle of some focus groups that kids said, we don't have time to watch cricket, but if it only lasted 3 hours, perhaps we'd have more time to do it. So to a certain extent, the OBE became because of the contribution I'd made to the ECB and also to hockey and other sports as well.
That's fantastic. And congratulations. That must have been a real honour.
Yeah, it was. And again, we had a massive lunch to celebrate with 24 of my closest. No, we didn't actually. We had it in Langhams down in the city. The Langhams in Victoria.
It's a nice place. Good fish in there, I think. I'm trying to remember now.
Yeah,
it's a nice
Richard Shepherd was always a great mate to all of us.
Lovely. Can I just take you back to when you started running your own business? When you went, is it 1978, I think?
Yeah.
How much was involved in running your own business? Just so people get more of it. I know it's different back then, but I think certain principles are still the same.
People were always important. People that you trusted to be in your own team. People that you felt you could work with because you'd worked with them before. So yes, I was lucky that, in fact, the Kirkwood Company for 6 months gave me all their business, even though I'd previously been a director of the company, while I helped them to find a replacement for me, working with their clients. So again, people are important, and we never stitched anybody up. That's quite important.
Yeah,
I think honesty is crucial.
I think transparency is one of your core values, isn't it? Transparency.
Absolutely.
I mean, that in a sales environment is essential for reputation.
I think that the problem that we had when the agencies realised they'd lost all the media to the media independents, the agencies decided they would have to buy some of the independents to get their money back. So TMD, Media Business, Chris Ingram, a number of them sold out, became very rich, and they ended up in a situation where the agencies then decided the way they would compete against those of us that were left was to fight on margins. So instead of working on professionalism and talent and strategic thinking, they decided to undercut us and came in at 1%, 2% or 3%. And then suddenly realized you couldn't afford any staff if you were handling media at 1% or 2%. So we ended up in a situation where the only way the big agencies could make money was to do deals with the media owners. So we ended up in a situation where we were competing professionally and honestly against people who were earning more of their money from the media owners and therefore doing agency deals that required them to guarantee share to whoever the media owner was in return for an increased agency commission that didn't come from the client, it actually came from the media owner. So that was a terrible time in the history of the media business. And one which is still going on today to a certain extent.
I see in you, John, there's a sparkle still about what you do. You can see this, do you still love it as much now as you did 40, 50 years ago?
My role's changed. I'm now executive chairman.
Yeah.
I love trying to help. It's hard networking when you don't have anywhere to go to take anybody.
Do you think there's going to be quite a big bounce back eventually after this? Do you think social networking in terms of physicalities, meeting up with people, going for lunch, do you think that might be on the rise again, John?
I think it will to a extent. It'll be very different. I don't think it'll be as lavish. No. I think a lot of it will be, in some instances, they won't have the margins to be able to do it anyway. So margins may change quite significantly. So that might change a lot. But I don't know, people say they'll all want to work from home. We've done some research, and most of our youngsters under 28 are desperate to get back in the office.
Yeah, I found the same.
To meet their mates, discuss their problems over a beer rather than in a Zoom call. And quite importantly, to be able to learn from their peer groups who've been around a lot longer. So I think that's quite important.
Do you feel, just before we wrap this call up today, do you feel you're seeing in youngsters today certain qualities, but also certain areas that are becoming more obvious? I mean, there's a lot around mental health in the society today and how that's being really challenged, and that's on the increase with, you know, people feeling more anxious, etc. As a business, are you protecting your employees in that particular area? What's your stance on that?
Yes, we are. And yes, we work with some of those mental health charities anyway.
Yeah.
And I don't think today you can work without being sensitive to people's problems. And it's hard when you're doing it at a distance on a Zoom call rather than being able to put your arm around somebody's shoulder and say, let's have a beer and chat about what your issues are.
Yeah. Do you feel that that's something that in the past, did people feel that they could open up, or that depending on the kind of leader you were, or, you know, what are the signs that you looked out for in the past, if you don't mind me asking?
It's a difficult question. I don't ask some of my team to answer that. I think if you go back to the swinging 60s when we started, if you weren't good enough and you had what would have been called mental health problems today, you got chucked out.
Yeah.
You weren't good enough to compete in what was a very competitive business. So I don't think it was a very different world then.
Yeah, totally.
And
I think it's changed more in the last.
The rules have changed. People were really hard in those days. If you didn't make it, you just got turned away. And good people, you had to have some bottle yourself. I remember in those days, rate cards were sacrosanct. You've got to think about that. We make all our money on negotiations these days. But in those days, I had a situation in my first year at Macy's. I discovered that a particular brand of, I think it was Simonized car for second-hand cars, their target audience was a particular second-hand car. We had a load of research, and it was much more economic to advertise in the News of the World than it was in the People.
Yeah.
But I thought to myself, as a graduate with a bit of lateral thinking, more importantly, a degree of numeracy, well, if I was running the People, I'd just change the rate. So I looked in Brad and found the ad director of the Sunday People. I didn't know from Adam.
Yeah.
You know, he did very bravely fought in the Second World War and come into advertising with a big title. And this young whippersnapper said to him, you've got to drop your rates to get the business for the Simonized account. And he put the phone down on me and rang up my chairman and said, this idiot is telling me to change something that is sacrosanct. And Bert DeVos, who was then my chairman, called me in and said, I've had a complaint about your behaviour. He said, I think this is fucking brilliant. This man has been insulting us all his life. And suddenly someone's come on and said, you can have a different rate for Simonized or pet foods or whatever it was. And he said, carry on, this is good. I think we can build an agency of more stature in the industry by operating like this, by using numbers rather than using bullying tactics or volume or share or whatever the arguments were. So that's how media negotiations really started back in those days in the 60s. I think The agencies then were much more creative than perhaps people realise. I've told this story once or twice. I'll very quickly tell it again. But the board director on the pet foods business that we handled, which was Trill Birdseed, was Murray Walker, who sadly passed away 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
he's 97. And he called us into a meeting, and I was 22. The creatives were all 23. And he said, we've got a real problem. Trill has got over 90% of the market for birdseed. And the client has a monopoly of a business where everybody in the country has already got a budgerigar. And he wants to change the profits. And I can't see a way around it. So I want you to all go home for the weekend, see if you can come up with an angle. And I thought, I don't, total volume. And even my mum had a budgerigar. So on the Monday, we all came back in the office. The creatives were sulking. And Murray Walker walked into the meeting and said, I've cracked it. And we all went, blimey, that's good. And he said, here's the line. And he just said, here's the line. An only budgerigar is a lonely budgerigar. And everybody in the country went out and bought a second budgerigar. And the market share stayed the same. And the volume of the universe doubled. My mum went out in East Grinstead and bought a second budgerigar.
That is amazing.
And it is a lovely, but there are lots of stories about Murray Walker. He was a genius.
Yeah, but lateral thinking. And
it was totally all about lateral thinking and actually strategic thinking too.
Yeah,
so
which I think goes out the window a lot with regards to the high emotions and the volatile markets that people can work in. Sometimes strategy it should be at the forefront of business decisions, but I'm not going to go into that too much today, obviously. But it's an interesting
strategy is absolutely crucial.
Absolutely, 100%, and certainly from a decision-making point of view. But can I just take a lasting memory from school? Go back again to those younger years when you're 13, 14, 15, that kind of era. What was your memory of school back then, John?
Grammar school with a generation of teachers who'd come out of World War II.
Right.
So some very old teachers who were very, very committed to education. And when you think about education, it was about maths, English language and Latin. And you had to have 8 subjects to do at O-level. And I could only find 7 that I wanted to study. I hated sciences, all too technical for me. And so I went into the woodwork class as my 8th subject. And the woodwork master was so upset with my abilities, he put my book trough through the electric saw and said, I'm not going to waste time on you teaching you how to do woodwork. You'll probably have staff to do it for you. And I said, thanks very much. That's very kind of you. I don't think my dad would think that. And he said, what would you like to do? I said, well, I'd like to learn another language. So he said, well, we only have one. We've got French. Latin is sacrosanct. But a French master does a little bit of Spanish. So why do you do Spanish O-levels? And I ended up doing Spanish O-levels and A-levels. I did O-levels in 6 months. And I now have a house in Spain. And it's been very important to me to have got thrown out of woodwork, and I can now talk to my gardener in his own language, which I probably wouldn't have done if I'd stayed in the woodwork class. So, but those teachers were very different to teaching today. And I think the one thing I was thinking about in relation to this conversation, I don't think that we had enough education in life.
No.
And there was, yes, the girls did domestic science, which you and I would call probably, without being insulting, cookery.
Yeah, that's it.
I've got a conference call at 2, so I'm afraid to a minute.
And
don't worry.
and the reality is, it would have been really handy to have been taught law, finance, politics, even if it was after work, and we'd have all been able to contribute more to our lives at that time, which we probably couldn't do because we didn't really have anyone there who'd had any experience. Most of my teachers, as I say, my master in charge of jobs said, if you can't think of anything, go in the civil service. That'll be safe for the next 40 years.
Wow.
Right, I'm really sorry.
Okay,
I've got
right.
calls.
I'm
Sorry.
gonna
have to go.
John, I want to say thank you so much for staying. Thank you, Caroline, as well.
No probs, no probs at
I'm
all.
going to let you guys go because you've got to go, but I would love to talk
Give us a
to
call.
you again.
Give us a call on a conventional phone.
I will. I'll speak to you soon. Take care, John.
Bye.
All the best.
Cheers.